Next up is we have Dave from Motiva. He is going to share around multivariate testing within emails. So this goes back to that always be testing culture. So Dave, I will stop sharing the presentation and allow you to pull yours up.
Cool. Thanks, Brandy. And hey, guys, I'm Dave Gatelius. I'm the founding CEO of Motiva. I was first product manager for Siri before we sold to Apple. So Motiva is kind of the latest in a long line of stuff I'm interested in doing and sort of bringing in machine learning and AI to use cases like this. And we are Oracle's main AI partner for Eloqua. So you think of us as kind of a plug-in to the Eloqua platform. And what we do is essentially allow you to create a sort of intelligence layer that can listen and adapt your email campaigns dynamically within that Eloqua platform. Eloqua is still doing all of the sending, all of the tracking, nothing else changes. It's just Motiva is able to listen dynamically for what's working and what's not inside of all of your campaigns across your different segments and canvases, and use that to adapt for better performance over time. So we do that across a number of different use cases, but just kind of dovetailing on Brandy's point around optimization, think of Motiva very much as an optimization engine. And I'm interested in kind of drilling down in some of the use cases, especially around partners and partnerships. Because I think if you think of you guys as sort of almost like a service provider to your partners, it feels like using Motiva, you can really add a lot of value in terms of helping them characterize not just sort of fit between messaging and particular audience segments, but really providing them better telemetry and better understanding of just who their audiences are and what's working and what's not. Kind of the magic behind what Motiva is doing in the background is basically improving all that sort of stuff, targeting content, segment tuning, all of those sorts of questions, and doing it automatically. So there's not a lot of human manipulation that happens with Motiva. You sort of tend to feed it an audience and some content, and it kind of takes care of the rest. So from a use case perspective and kind of thinking about the specific capabilities, what Motiva can support is, of course, where we got started with this with multivariate email optimization. So think of anything you could think of as an email asset, essentially. We can test any aspect of that asset. So instead of just a two-way subject line test, which you may be doing now, think of a five-way subject line test at the same time you're doing like a three-way CTA option and maybe throwing a couple of different versions of the body all in one email step. So Motiva takes all of those combinations, figures out what's working and what's not, and does it completely automatically. We've also recently released send time optimization. This is basically just figuring out when is the perfect time for that particular individual person that you're trying to reach out to. When do they want to see that email? We've seen a lot of really great stories with our customers just by using this little capability to tune up the time in which you're triggering those emails. It's very straightforward to get some better performance out of your engagement rates that way. We also do subject line analysis and generation. We'll actually take a look at all your subject lines and give you active feedback into what's working and what's not. We've seen a million of these things. So we have a pretty good idea of kind of what works and what doesn't. And we'll actually also give you at least 3 variations back that you might want to try in the future, given your content. We've got a very sophisticated frequency management system. Think of this as kind of a global traffic cop to make sure your campaigns are not colliding with one another. You're not over emailing those audience members. And again, it's a great way to sort of tune up your touch point strategy. We've found that by looking at some of the analytics around what sorts of frequency works better for your given audience, we can actually identify some sweet spots, really take advantage of those frequency preferences, and set a global limit. So Motiva will control everything that's going out on a per contact basis, make sure that nobody gets over emailed. Respect that limit that you set. We're also characterizing the different levels of engagement within your larger population and tracking that over time. So giving you an easy way to see how much of the population is responding in any way to your content and giving you a way to really track and be accountable for the performance that you're expected to deliver for those partners and stakeholders. We do a lot of segment discovery and audience targeting tuning as well. This comes for free whenever we're doing any kind of testing around email. And I'll show you an example of this. But basically what we can do is surface new subpopulations within larger segments or larger audience groups. And you may not have ever seen these audiences in quite this form before. We found it's a great way to not just tune up email, but think about how we can better target across channels. So getting back to one of Brandy's points, is really thinking about that multi-channel strategy and what we can do to improve that across the board, not just in a single email campaign. And then finally, we're getting into really taking a close look at data health and helping you get a sense for how good your contact data is on a coverage basis. Reason being, if we're going to start making decisions around data and kind of what we're doing in these campaigns, let's make sure the underlying data is as solid as we can make it. So that's a quick view of kind of the basic capabilities, but would love to just give you a sense of kind of how the app works. It is an app. It takes 5 minutes to turn us on inside of Eloqua. It's not a huge integration thing or anything like that. The basic way that you're interacting with Motiva on a tactical basis, this what we're looking at is, for those of you who are not current Eloqua users, the Eloqua canvas. It's a basic way that you can drag and drop different logical elements and construct, in some ways very complex if you want to, very complex campaigns here. And we interact with this canvas through our what we call smart steps. The main ones are these three here, what we're talking about. Message testing AI step, the send time AI step, and the simple email step. They all basically do the same thing in terms of sending email in various different ways, but you'd use one or the other of these just depending on what you're up to at any given. Super easy to set these up. And then once they're up, they're completely autonomous. So there's not a lot of manipulation that you need to do. It's just sort of letting Motiva kind of take its path forward for you, basically on its own. So what we're looking at here is an example of maybe one of those steps where we've got a message testing use case. And let's say we've got 4 versions of an email that we've sent out in this case. And in this case, what it's a great example of finding a single great example or great variant that did wind up being the winner for this campaign. We had, in this case, we set it up to be about 2 weeks long. In the early days, we don't know anything about the preferences in the audience versus this particular content. So we're going to do, down here, you'll see an even split with these 4 variations. And then as soon as Motiva starts to get opens and clicks back from this audience, we're going to start to update our understanding sort of what's working and what's not. As soon as we get that signal, it's going to start managing the portfolio. So the very next batch that goes out is going to be privileging the strategies that are working and taking away volume, email volume from those emails that are not doing well. And that's exactly how Motiva kind of manages that portfolio over a given window for a campaign. You don't have to have a 2-week campaign. This can happen, over a single day. But it's completely up to you as to, what the configuration is. In this case, though, we saw that very quickly Motiva discovered 2 of the versions were not performing as well. We shut those down, red and yellow here. That left the blue and green versions to battle it back and forth, basically for the rest of the time. And then towards the end of this particular campaign, we did discover, okay, we've got the statistically significant winner here. Drop everything, go all in on that single variant. That's what it's a great example of basically how we can pull more performance out of any given content you kind of throw at it and automatically boost the response rates in a campaign. And in this case, you could see, good thing we did that. The best version did, a full order of magnitude better than the weakest version in this case. There's a view of that kind of rolled up, same campaign, same step, rolled up over across those 4 variants, just to give us a sense of sort of what happened during that campaign. So you can see we sent out to about 20,000 folks, unique open rate, unique click-through rate, and a click-to-open rate that was pretty healthy. The other thing that we monitor whenever you're doing a campaign test like this is just when does it make sense to send that email out. So typically what you're doing is giving Motiva a sort of time window in which to operate. We'll actually give you feedback right back, giving you a sense of, given that time window, when were the best performing and worst performing slots. So the next time you run this for this campaign or maybe even another campaign, you can actually use that telemetry to set that window much more appropriately. And in this case, we could have done a little bit of tuning here and really tuned up the open rates quite easily. The other actually more interesting example is when we don't get necessarily a single winner, we get different parts of the population responding to different variants in our content. And that can tell us not just about what to do in terms of content to make that more effective, but actually a little bit more about who's in this segment in the first place. And it may not be something that you necessarily recognize. So in this case, similar sort of thing. We have this campaign of running over about 2 weeks. Good level of performance across the top 2. The yellow one, again, was sort of trailing, but it was still getting some response from a part of this population. So we did keep it in the entire time. We get a result like that oftentimes when we have diversity in the underlying population that we're trying to treat. So what Motiva will do is actually give you a report that shows you, of the folks that are responding, what do they have in common? And we're just pulling on the underlying contact records that you have stored in that Eloqua contact database, and then just giving you a quick sense, is there a pattern here that's developing over this population as a whole? And we'll give you that picture right up front in this, what we call a Who Responded report. The second half of the report actually allows you to drill down on an attribute by attribute basis. So this is kind of a B2B example, but think of this as any attribute that you are collecting around your audiences. It could be anything from demographics to psychographics to lead scoring to anything that you're collecting. And you can tell Motiva for those fields that you're most interested in, take that data that you're storing around those contacts and project it against that behavioral response. And back to Brandy's point, and one of the guy from the Ducks example is really cool because this is exactly the kind of telemetry that you could turn around and give to a sponsor or a partner, right? Because what we're doing here is really digging into the segments that are responding, or the parts of the segment that are responding. And that can be useful in all sorts of marketing use cases, not just email. So again, just kind of squint your eyes and imagine this is a different attribute that you're more interested in than company size, but could be anything. In this case, though, we've got our 3 variants kind of spread across the top and the volume we sent each of those out during this campaign. And then below that, the values of the folks who are actually opening and clicking email. And in this case, for this attribute, we can see we're doing a lot better with large enterprise contacts, and then contacts that are associated with kind of small, medium-sized business. And then test C, this variant over here, was attracting a completely different set of people. I don't know, maybe not completely, but a quite different set of people, better in the kind of mid-enterprise, mid-level market. So that tells us something that A, there's diversity in this population. B, we may want to actually treat these different types of people differently in the future with different content. And C, actually, really questioning the assumption that maybe we shouldn't use this segment going forward in the first place. Maybe it should be actually split out in some different ways, depending on kind of what we're trying to do. With this attribute here, this is the industry attribute. Again, it could be anything, but what I want you to concentrate on is just how different the people are that are responding to at least these two different, very different pieces of content. And again, you can imagine, getting to a result where you've kind of seen people like this before responding to things, but they never really buy anything. They never really purchase that jersey or purchase that ticket, whatever that use case is, versus, maybe this persona over here, a little maybe closer to the ICP, what you've seen before in terms of people who've converted or shown more, actionable interest. What you can do with that result is really try to use this to pull apart the differences within those segments and have that inform not just email marketing, but across your channel strategy. So we have customers who use this sort of result to tune up PPC and take essentially demographic definitions that we can pull out here directly into Facebook, into AdWords campaigns, into even LinkedIn campaigns. They use this to tune up SEO and design new landing pages. So you can really be creative with not just getting better at kind of testing incrementally your content, but using that sort of the exhaust, the results of that experiment to inform what you're doing kind of across channels. So I just wanted to kind of dwell on this particular use case because thinking about those partners, those sponsors, this is a great value add that you could provide not just your own teams, but also those sponsors as well. This is a view that they likely do not have. That's pretty unique to us. That's the kind of the best view of the content testing. We do a bunch more than that though. So just to give you a sense for another view of kind of what we do, I'm going to go back over here quickly. We actually create a way for you to dig through all of your active campaigns, everything that's been done in the past, and figure out what's working and what's not. So Motiva will actually surface opportunities for you to put one of our smart steps in place to improve performance dynamically. We're also beginning to really kind of dig into this, what we call an engagement funnel, and trying to characterize the populations that you are trying to communicate with and how they differ over time. So are you doing a better job over time of moving folks from, say, a no engagement sort of bucket down through that funnel to becoming more engaged over time? Point of our report here is just to show you, give you two months that you can compare side by side and just see what's happening. And this could be a great way, regardless of whether you're using Motiva steps or not, just to kind of monitor those interventions that you're trying, those new strategies that you're trying. Is it having an effect? And what effect is that? And obviously what we want to do is do things that over time, more people wind up further down in the funnel, considering engaged in our. So that's another new capability. In terms of the frequency analytics, very powerful way for you to see what happens when you email on average once per week versus twice, 3 times, 4 times per week and on up. Usually what we've been able to do is dig into that data for you, figure out what a really good sweet spot is, and then we can use that to actually set that hard limit that I mentioned earlier, where Motiva will kind of do all of the traffic control for you and make sure you don't go over that limit. This is actually, we're looking at a real customer where the sort of gut level advice was never send more than once per week or thereabouts. And we showed them pretty quickly that by sending slightly more frequently, in their case, just kept them top of mind for that audience. And they got about a 30% bump on opens and unique clicks, just by taking a little bit different strategy there. So they took that result, put it into practice, and they actually saw that actually play out in their campaign. Pretty cool. So that's that. In terms of send time optimization, this has been one of our best successes kind of across the board. And it's that capability where we're learning the personal open time preference for every single individual that you're trying to communicate with. So we've got a patent on this, but basically the way that it operates is it's wide open to whatever those crazy preferences are in that population, and it will learn that perfect trigger time. So we'll hold on to that content until just the right moment, and then release that content out to that contact as we learn more and more about what those preferences are across the population. That's that. And then just quickly, what we've been able to do is create ways for us to be even more sort of proactively useful. So we have an agent called M, and M gives you sort of monitors all of your campaigns and what's happening in those campaigns and gives you proactive advice. So sometimes it's the subject lines and sort of ways to improve that. Sometimes it's interpreting campaigns and giving you ideas of kind of what to try next or interesting things that seem to be happening in those campaigns that may be actionable for you. So trying to be helpful just in terms of helping our customers get the most out of not just Motiva, but that entire Eloqua platform.